Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Hello to the folks joining in. See some attendees coming in. Hi, all. Thank you for joining. We're going to give it just a few minutes to let folks trickle on in. But in the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can tell us your name, your affiliate or organization, or if you're from an FRN chapter, either currently or previously. Let us know your connection to FRN and where in the world you're tuning in from. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Hello to the folks joining in. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. In the meantime, you can share your name, affiliation to FRN, and where you're calling in from in the chat. Looks like we have Megan, who's from the chapter at Worcestershire. Welcome. Colin with gift card. Thank you for joining us today. Oh, hi, Lauren. Lauren's a great supporter of ours with Fairlife team. Thanks for joining us, Lauren. We'll give it just another minute. Looks like we have more folks coming in. Hi, Tom with EPA. Nice to see you. And Marguerite with North Carolina Central University Food Pantry. Hello. Amazing. Keep introducing yourself in the chat. We'll get started in just a minute or so. Hi, Helene with Share My Meals, calling in from New Jersey. Hello. Hi, Kevin on our board. Nice to see you here. Karen from North Dakota State University. Awesome. We're having folks all over. Oh, John, it's nice to see you for Taproot. Regina's excited to say hi. Oh, Tiffany with the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. I know you all have an awesome food recovery program as well. Awesome. Charles, hi, thanks for joining us. Amazing. Well, thank you all. Keep it coming through the chat as folks come in, and keep introducing yourselves. We want this to be an interactive session, so keep chatting through the chat function. We also have our Q&A function open that you're welcome to ask any questions throughout our time here today. And we'll make sure to get to as many as we can, any questions that you have throughout the session and at the end of the session. Also, as a note, the session's being recorded. But we cannot see or hear you, but we're just recording the session to be able to post it afterwards for any folks that weren't able to join us live. So with that, I will get us started here. So thank you all again for joining our Roundtable Talks. This is an opportunity for our team here at Food Recovery Network to talk a bit about our recent work and our work ahead. So now that we have completed our program year as of June, we work on the academic calendar. We will be recapping all of our amazing learnings and findings over the past year, as well as talking about our work ahead. We have a few amazing guests and hosts on the call here with us today. But before we dive into introductions, we want to get a sense of who's on the call with us as well, the folks on the call. So Akimi, if you can launch our first poll. We're curious to see what describes your affiliation with FRN. Are you a student? Are you a higher education professional, a nonprofit partner, etc.? So please take a minute to fill that in. We will share the results shortly. Amazing. All right, Kimmy, you can go ahead and end the poll, and then if you want to share the results as well so everyone can see. It looks like we have a good amount of diversity across the call, a lot of general community supporters, a lot of higher education professionals. Thank you all for joining. This is a really nice spread of groups across the call. This is helpful for us just to understand who's in here with us in the moment. And then Kimmy, if you wouldn't mind sharing the next poll, we're curious to see who has attended a roundtable talk before with FRN. Awesome, I see some results coming in. We'll give it just a few more seconds. Awesome. And Kimmy, if you want to share those. All right, so it looks like a good amount of folks have not joined a roundtable talk before, which is great. Welcome, glad to have you here, and some folks that have before. Amazing. So with that, we will dig right in. I want to take a moment to introduce our amazing hosts and presenters here today. We have a number of folks on the call, and I'll allow folks to introduce themselves. First, I'll start off with you, Regina, our executive director, if you want to share a few words.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today, for your interest, for your support. My name is Regina, and I, for the past 8 years, have been the executive director of Food Recovery Network, and really look forward to sharing all that we've learned this past year and where we're headed for this current year with all of you. So thanks again for your time and your willingness to participate.
Thank you, Regina. Next, I will introduce our Chief Operating Officer, Katie Jones.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Katie. We also have Kimmy on the call, who's our Development Associate. Kimmy, if you want to say a few words to say hi.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. Thank you all for joining.
Awesome. Kimmy will support with any logistical things, so you can chat her if you have any questions. And then finally, I'm pleased to introduce our special guest of the today, Tina, who is our board president. So Tina, I will let you take it away to say a few words.
Yeah, hi everyone. I am thrilled to be here. I have attended a roundtable before, but I've never had the opportunity to say hello and to say thank you to all of you who joined and who are so very interested and passionate in the work of the Food Recovery Network. So it is an honor and a privilege to serve on the board. Kevin Rettel is our treasurer of the board. I see he's joined here today. So hi to him. I know we're all very busy, so giving us the gift of time to come and learn more about what Food Recovery Network does and what we've done this past year and what we're going to be doing in this coming fiscal year is really a gift for you to give us your time. I've also had the opportunity to give some of my time, as you can see from these photos, to Food Recovery Network, including going by one of our pop-up farmers markets in Atlanta earlier this spring. That's me with Kimmy and some others from our staff. It was a real eye-opener to see our work in action. Absolutely loved it. In addition to giving your time, I would be remiss if in my role as part of the board of directors, I didn't mention that, you know, we're very interested in financial support as well. It helps us do this amazing work like what you see here in some of these photos and what we're going to talk about here today. So as you listen to what Kimmy and Cassie and Katie and Regina have to say about all we've accomplished in this last fiscal year. I mean, we have recovered over, and I say we, our Food Recovery Network and the efforts that you're going to hear about have recovered more than 3.7 million pounds of surplus food. That's more than 3 million meals. And, you know, what we plan to accomplish in the coming fiscal year, think about, you know, which includes, by the way, addressing the root causes of hunger. That's a very important part of our mission. And so just, you know, consider whether you can help fund us financially as well as your gift of time here today. And I will call out that we are still in Hunger Action Month. That's the month of September, waning days of September. And I know we have a guest on here from Fairlife. Fairlife is matching donations through the month of September. So with that, I'll toss it back to Cassie, who I think is going to talk a little bit more about those who generously fund us. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you so much, Tina. Appreciate it. Yes, that was a beautiful segue. I just want to thank our partners that are on the call, as well as those that were able to make it today. Appreciate your support for our efforts in growing our network. So with that, we will dig right in. For the folks that have not been on a Roundtable Talk before, we wanted to share our general goals for the conversation here today. As well, I mentioned earlier that we host these on a biannual basis to be able to really be open and transparent about our data and our learnings here at Food Recovery Network. We don't want to operate within a vacuum. We know that we're a network and we have many partners all across the food supply chain. So we want to be open and transparent about what we're learning so that can apply to other groups as well. We also want to intentionally build a feedback loop with you all and the folks that are in our network to be able to inform our programs and ensure that they are in alignment with our student leaders, with our community supporters, with all the amazing groups in our network to ensure that we're really working together to meet our shared goals. And finally, we really want to deepen relationships with you all and with our network to be able to strengthen our collective efforts in recovering food and feeding people today. So with that, I will turn it over to Regina, who will kick us off and share a little bit more about what students can learn on the call.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Cassie. And, I always start off with saying a couple of things that throughout the conversation, you're just going to hear a lot of gratitude, a lot of thanks, because the work that we're doing, while, we say it's very easy to do the right thing with surplus food, changing our behavior over generations of actually wasting food takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort. And so we are so grateful to all of you for being here with us and for caring, because together, collectively, that's how we're going to really change the action from wasting food to recovering food. And especially thank you to our incredible students and our alums who are on this webinar with us today. You literally are the ones who are taking all this precious surplus food from your campuses, from surrounding restaurants and anywhere where there's food, farm fields, and donating it locally to where that food is most needed. So we are committed to continuing to foster your leadership by doing a few things, and you'll see more throughout this conversation about how we at the national office want to invest in the ability, the power of young people, of our students and our alums. So you'll see there's a few things to be on the lookout for. That's my dog, Cliff. You'll see that there's a few things to be on the lookout for. The official chapter agreement. We're going to have lots of one-on-one calls. That's a great way for all of us to get to know one another. And then we have our volunteer engagement strategy. So be on the lookout for these things. Thank you so much for all that you do. And, even outside of this, feel free to always be in touch. We love hearing from all of you. And then I do want to move on to our more formal acknowledgements for our conversation today, just to set an intention. So here we understand and we want to communicate to everyone that our framework that we've been talking about for the past several years that we developed with Tina, with Kevin on the board, and others on the board with the national staff, our framework works to eliminate the racial and ethnic disparities that occur in the United States because of continued community disinvestment. That we can feed everyone who is hungry in the United States by reconfiguring some of the structures that perpetually keep people hungry. That's what we're here to do. So we want to recognize that this is difficult work and that we all come at this in varying degrees of knowledge, of understanding. And that at Food Recovery Network, we want to be accepting of where people are at within their own journey of this. We want to make sure that we honor and recognize the land that we're on, that we here at Food Recovery Network, we are on the land of the Piscataway Conoy. It is a modern day tribe. They are still with us today. And so we thank the Piscataway Conoy, for being stewards of our land and our water and our air, and that we believe that Black Lives Matter. And when we say Black Lives Matter, again, this is something that a term, a word, a phrase that might mean something different for all of us. What we mean by that is, it's not to say that only Black lives matter and other lives don't matter. That's not it at all. What we mean by that is, historically in the United States, we have structurally devalued the lives of Black people, and that shows up in many different disparities. When we think about the communities that are most in need of food, that are most in need of other community resources, who have seen resources being stripped from their communities, it is most often Black and brown communities. And when we think about recovering from that disinvestment, it is most often Black and brown communities that do not have the same tools to rebuild from that continual disinvestment. That is what we mean. And we also have to say that we see and honor and recognize our Asian communities as well, another group within the United States that is often facing a lot of racism and hate. So we stand with our Asian community as well. So thank you all for that. I know sometimes that's, we might need to take a few breaths for that. So do what you might need to do now and throughout the conversation together, because really we fortify ourselves to do the work of recovering surplus food to feed everyone who is hungry in the United States. That is the work of Food Recovery Network. And today we're going to talk about our continued contribution to that effort. And so the framework that I mentioned, so this, I hope, for some of you who've sat in on our roundtable talks, this looks like a familiar slide. For many of you, and most of you who have never attended a roundtable talk before, this is our framework. This is what drives the work of Food Recovery Network year over year over year, where we have two indicators that we know that we are putting forward our unique contribution when we see 26 million tons of surplus food that is wasted at the commercial and institutional setting. We see that number going down. And another indicator, we know that the 34 million people who right now, today, are structurally food insecure, when we see that number go down. These are the indicators that we know that our unique contribution is making a difference, is making an impact. And our factors are here. We're here to mitigate waste. We're here to recover surplus food and fight climate change. And then we have three strategies that inform that work, that become the blocks with which we work every single day. Combined together is how we plan to recover surplus food to feed everyone who's hungry in the United States. And here we are, fall. During this conversation, what we tend to do is we talk about our last program year, so 2022 through 2023, and then we talk about where we're headed. And so I want to make sure that everyone here, again, because I know we have a lot of new folks that we hope to get engaged in this work, and thank you again for coming. We wanted to let everyone know, okay, what was it that we set out to do last program year? We wanted to recover 2 million pounds of food. We wanted to recruit 20 to 30 new chapters, specifically in our target states. And Katie will talk more about what those target states, what does that mean for us? Why do we have those target states? We wanted to expand our organizational impact, and that includes a refinement of our maps. And we will talk more about what are our maps. So if you feel like you don't know what I'm talking about right now, please know that we'll have lots of information for all of you. And then, as I started out at the beginning of our conversation, we wanted to build deeper connections. Shout out again to all the students and alums. We want to build deeper connections with all of you. And we do that by convening town halls, by bringing everyone together for large-scale food recoveries, by working with our community colleges. And I was just in Philadelphia this past weekend doing a large-scale recovery with incredible FRN alums. It was like emotionally overwhelming, actually, to like see all of these really fantastic people that I know are so dedicated, just as I am, in recovering food, and to work alongside them. We made quick work of the whole entire Civic Arena in Philadelphia. We recovered all this incredible food together. So those relationships, that's how we work. It's what fuels us. And then really quickly, here's what we did last year. Incredible. So we wanted to, we recovered more than what we thought. We recovered 3.7 million pounds of food. And you can see here what that translates into in terms of meals and CO2 diverted from going into our atmosphere. We recruited 31 new chapters. So shout out to our awesome new chapters joining the network. Thank you all so much. And 10 of those new chapters were in our target states. We continued to work on the mapping. Again, we'll have more information about that. But we saw through our work that we were able to put in almost $500,000 back into the communities where we work. And we were really proud of that. And then all of you, again, our incredible students and alums, almost 16,000 hours of volunteer time. And we had some really amazing conversations with everyone. So our town halls, these roundtable talks, we'll have another one in the winter. We had lots of virtual and in-person events, all geared at building relationships. And to dig in further to each of these 4 metrics and the subsets within these metrics, I'm going to turn things over to Katie, who, just so you all know, is a little bit under the weather. So I just wanted to, honor and recognize and say thank you, Katie, for rallying for us, so that
You're
you can
very
walk
welcome.
everyone through. So thanks everyone so much.
Sure. So how did we go about surpassing all of these goals? The first and foremost is we recovered nearly double the amount of food that we thought, and that was largely powered by our partnership with the FarmLink project, where we partner with them to recover surplus food from large commercial farms across the United States. So that was a large portion of how we recovered food. But our chapter pounds also continued to go up this year. One of the things that's been nice to see is semester after semester, the pounds are growing, which is the first time we have seen this level of consistent growth since the pandemic. And so we are not yet back to pre-pandemic levels, but we are getting there. And so we continue to support our students in any way that we can, individual technical assistance, financial assistance, to make sure that they can recover the most food on their campus as possible. One of the other changes that we made during the pandemic was also different ways that students could engage beyond surplus food and recovering on their campus. Because as aligned with the strategic framework, we're going to need to do that more than just recover food in order to actually feed everyone who's experiencing food insecurity in the US. So we have built out resources for students to advocate both on the local, state, and federal levels for legislation that's aligned with our values and our strategic framework, as well as get deeper in community engagement opportunities. So that is direct volunteering with their partner agency, that's fundraising, that's also raising awareness on campus. So one of the things that we've been delighted to see year over year is that our chapters continue to engage in different ways. What's also interesting is part of the pandemic, what we did is expand where we volunteer and where we recover surplus food. So I mentioned we partner with large commercial farms through the FarmLink project, but we also used our strategic framework to focus on smaller gleaning opportunities. So the question here, aligned with the economic security portion of our strategic framework, is how do we keep resources that are cultivated in communities in those communities? So we ran 2 separate pilots, one in Atlanta, which is what Tino was mentioning before, and another one in Irvine, California. And the first I'm going to talk a little bit about Atlanta, because we have been in Atlanta for 3 years. We're going on our 4th, where we really worked with community partners to figure out how we can be additive to the actions that are already occurring on the ground and really do what FRN does best, which is leverage the latent capacity that exists in communities and start connecting those dots so we can feed more people faster. So this is the initial results for how we have partnered with our Atlanta community. And I'm delighted to announce on this call that we have finally landed on our replicable model that we now seek to expand into our target states because of our work in Atlanta and because of the feedback with our partners in Atlanta. And that is, we have partnered with local funders, the Atlanta Department of Education, and other community partners, where now we host pop-up farmers markets at 3 Title I elementary schools, which are schools that the Atlanta Department of Education has identified as living in areas with large food access disparities. And so this is where we bring surplus food to the community, and it's free of charge, and everybody is welcome to it. And in the weeks that we are not hosting a pop-up market, we have a community refrigerator program to ensure consistent access to food at those elementary schools for those communities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later and what that means for how we move forward. But we're really excited about this work, and particularly scaling that model in the years to come in our target states. This year also concluded our work in Irvine, California, where we had been for about 18 months to 2 years, where we ran a similar pilot to what we did in Atlanta. So we knew our results for Atlanta for what worked, but we didn't know if that was unique to Atlanta market conditions and unique to Atlanta growing seasons. Would we actually see the same results if we tried the same strategies in a completely different area? Literally climate, economic, community, etc. And the 2 biggest takeaways that I will say is yes and no. What we found both in Irvine and in Atlanta is that when we pay farmers for their surplus produce, they don't till it under. That food can be used to now feed people who are experiencing hunger. And that was true across the 2 different pilot areas. The other thing that we found that was consistent is FRN does best when we partner with what's going on in the communities, and we establish those community partnerships to be additive. So for instance, what was really interesting in Irvine is while there was a lot of surplus food, once we paid farmers to not till it under, and just to clarify, we didn't pay market rate for that surplus food, but we didn't pay them zero, which we know is what happens when they till it under. So what was interesting in California is, given the level of traffic, while there was so much surplus food in one area, people were very reluctant to drive it to the area where it was actually most needed. So again, FRN came in through collaborating with our national partners and saying, well, what if we pay you for the time to actually transport it from A to B? And people said, great, like now we don't have an issue. So again, the similarities of we compensate people, which is again aligned with our strategic framework of creating economic security for people, and we partner with the existing resources on the ground to keep resources grown in community within the community. So again, we are super excited about closing out the work in Irvine and then now looking to scale our replicable model in the years to come. So where does that leave us in terms of other goals that we've established? Again, we are delighted to have surpassed recruiting and outreach efforts to establish new chapters in our target states. So we welcome all of the chapters that are on this slide now. I'll talk a little bit about how our target states have changed based on our mapping work. But again, this was a huge investment of FRN, saying if we can get into these communities where there is both the most amount of surplus food and the most people of experiencing hunger and higher education institutions, then we can feed more people faster. And I'm delighted to say that across the board, that has been true. The next slide will show you where we are in terms of total impact to date. And what's really tremendous about these numbers is, since we have instituted our strategic framework, we have recovered 329% more food than we did before 2019. So again, FRN learning to really partner with community, hone our contribution, and be additive where it's most needed has really made a huge difference to us. Now, let me stop there for any questions that might have come through the chat. Or if you do have questions for me so far, put them in the chat. And then after I stop there, I'll go a little bit into our mapping work and what we found this year and how that influences what we'll do moving forward.
Thanks, Katie. No questions so far. I did see Tom shared a chat about appreciating how much money makes a big difference in work level and dignity. Very much agreed. I also wanted to open up the space for you, Regina, if you had any additional comments. And like Katie said, continue sharing your questions that you might have in the chat as we continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think when the slide that showed our framework, and again, we'll make sure that this video is available to everyone because I know we have a lot of new folks here. The ending hunger forever portion, this is where our advocacy work comes to play. And one of the things that FRN is another partnership that we have is with the Poor People's Campaign, which is around the long journey to increasing the federal minimum wage. Right now, the wages are very suppressed, and there's nowhere in the United States that you can live and make minimum wage and expect to pay for an apartment and your healthcare and your transportation. There's nowhere that you can live off of that paltry amount. And so, Tom, to your point, yes, people need money to become economically secure, and that is a big part of how we plan to end hunger forever, is to help support our 34 million people who are facing food insecurity. If you are food insecure, you are economically insecure.
Thank you, Regina. I will turn it back over to you, Katie. Continue on.
Great. So many of you, or those who are new to FRN, might or may not have heard me talk about this project of the maps, where when I came on in 2020, we used the data that was available to us at the time and the competencies that were available to our organization at the time to look at disaggregated data sets to say, okay, where is the most amount of surplus generated in the United States? Overlay that with where the Feeding America data of where people are experiencing hunger, overlay that with the race and ethnicity data from the US Census, and then overlay that with four-year universities. And that was where we focused, and that's what you'll see with the map on the left. And that is really how we had focused our outreach strategies over the last 3 years. But as we were implementing this strategy, what we were finding, not surprisingly, is number one, hunger is not restricted to state lines, and hunger is not evenly distributed across a state. So what we figured out very quickly was we actually needed better data and more expertise to get more specific about where in the United States we actually need to be. And so we partnered with the University of Minnesota Institute of the Environment for a far more robust and sophisticated data analysis, which you now see on the right, which also led us to talk to a number of experts to understand things that we did and did not understand before to help us recalculate where we're going to work. And so in terms of what this data means, and we're going to do a separate webinar just on the maps. So this is just a high level takeaway for now. When we looked at the data, the first thing that we found, which is not necessarily surprising, is when we looked at FRN's opportunity to scale, the largest states rose to the top, because in the sense, the largest states have the most number of four-year colleges across the board. But what was interesting is when we actually looked deeper into the data, those four-year colleges were not necessarily located next to the areas where there was the most people experiencing hunger. So for example, in Texas, 80% of the four-year universities are located in 20% of the landmass. So if you look on a map for Texas, you will see that there's a lot of universities in Austin and Houston and Dallas, but when you look at the need side, there's a lot of need by the border where there isn't a lot of four-year universities. So that led us to say, okay, we can't just look at the number of universities. We need to look at actually the geographic distribution of universities so we can actually get the food where it's most needed. Which brings us to the second point, which was really illuminating for us because we had been using the Feeding America data to determine need. And as we talked to an array of experts, what we learned about is that there's a lot of limitations to what certain things measure. So just looking at the Feeding America data was not actually sufficient for defining need, because Feeding America has a compilation of things they pull from, but that is different from SNAP, and that is different from income, and that is different from poverty. And we were really fortunate to partner with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT's Living Wage Center, where they specifically researched the gap between what the median income is in a particular community and what it actually takes to live in that community. So we have a far more robust understanding of what need actually is. And what really surprised us from that work is, of the 3,100 counties in the United States, there's only about 100 where people actually make enough to live in that community. So the majority of the United States is not making enough money to live in their community. So that means for us at FRN, the need is actually far greater than what we saw before. So what that led us to do is we do have a revised list of states, but what we also did was create a longer list of all 50 states to say, okay, if we were to work in the 50 states, this is the exact county we want to focus on, because that's actually where all of the resources align disproportionately, so we can actually feed more people faster. The last thing I want to mention, which was interesting for us, is when we actually looked at the maps and we looked at the data, and you'll see that on the next slide. What was really interesting is so often it was community colleges more often than four-year universities that existed in those areas where there was the most surplus food generated by higher education institutions, the most people in need, kind of regardless of how you define that, higher education institutions, large race ethnic disparities, where there's FRN chapters, et cetera. So now we're able to get very specific data. For instance, you see here for Kentucky, to say, okay, not only do we need to be in, this happens to be in the county where Louisville's in, but we need to make sure that we figure out a model to be in community colleges, because that's actually how we're going to unlock our impact. And so one of the things we look to do in this coming year is start to make those connections, because again, FRN has traditionally relied on a four-year model, and a community college model. The composition of is just fundamentally different. So what does that mean? Again, to use that latent capacity and those existing community resources, so we can feed more people faster. So where does that leave us in terms of our priority areas and how we'll move forward going into this academic year? Well, what you'll see here is basically two priority rankings. One based on just the sheer number of universities that are present in a state, which would be amenable to our current model. And then you also see on the right-hand side, the geographic distribution. So where are there four-year universities that are actually in close proximity to the people experiencing hunger? And across these two findings, California, New York, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts show up on both. So that's actually where we are going to be focusing our outreach efforts moving forward. Outreach efforts, number one, meaning getting more chapters. Number two, ideally running community college pilots. And number three, targeting those areas for replication of our Atlanta Title I pop-up markets. So as we continue to reach out to the network, if you do have connections with any of these things or any of these people, we would very much appreciate them. Because again, all of our initial data says if we put our model in these areas, we will reduce food waste, feed people, and engage community partners, which is, really a triple bottom line, thinking of it that way. So I know that was a lot of information. Let me stop there for any additional questions before I turn it back to Regina for, again, what we learned this year and how we will pivot moving forward.
Thank you, Katie. I did see a couple of questions just come through the chat. Tom asked, are the largest needs in urban communities more often?
More often than not, yes, because that's largely where the largest race and ethnicity disparities exist. What I will also say is we did see a lot, particularly in the Midwest, of Native communities that come up that aren't necessarily urban communities, but that was kind of one of the key findings as well.
Great, thank you. And a more logistical question that Colin asked is there an email list or directory where we can see everyone in FRN and what their area of focus is? And I'll just say that, yeah, we have a chapters map on our website. Kimmy, if you can add the link to the chat, that'll show chapters all across the US. Katie or Regina, anything else to share there?
I would say, Colin, if there's an idea that you have or a group that you want to get in touch with, please let us know. You can also get in touch with us directly and we can help, navigate you to where you need to go. Especially if there's a higher ed institution, that you have in mind, if you want to check to see if they have a chapter or not. And that goes for everyone on this webinar as well. And then I guess, my response to what we've learned from the maps that Katie just outlined for all of us, again, we will have a dedicated conversation just about this. This is a couple of years worth of data, research, many conversations, as Katie noted. And there's a lot more that we can unfurl for everyone, because it's really important that everyone understands how we're approaching this work so that you can give us the feedback. Or as we were talking about earlier before we hit record on this, feed forward to help us support our models. So it's so important to us, but it's also pretty dense. But one of the responses, it's dense, but it's not impossible. I mean, we really want everyone to understand our methodology with this. But at the end of the day, I think we really just need to give a little bit of space and time to the fact that of the 3,100 counties in the United States, only about 100 of them, 100 is the average person making a living wage to survive, to get their kids to school, to have their medical needs met, to have higher education aspirations and actually attain them. So when we think about what the United States expects of us as a culture, as a group, but then also the responsibilities that are foisted upon the individual and how we internalize a lot of those failings as moral failings, that's actually not what's happening. We just don't support living wages for people to be able to do the things that they need to do to thrive. So for me, that was just a really big moment so that we can all understand it's not just us, it's not just us making poor decisions with the money that we have. There just isn't enough money. I remember going to a conference a while ago focused on community colleges, and one of the speakers said there's just too much rent at the end of the month. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here. And so when we know, we can face it. As James Baldwin always reminds us, one of my favorite quotes, now that we know these things, it's up to us to raise our energies, raise our abilities, raise our voices, to reconfigure so that we are not continuing with this, what I call madness. So that's some of the things that strike me based on what Katie has outlined for all of us.
Thank you, Regina. And Charles, I see your question in the chat. We'll come back to that. For now, I will turn it over to Regina to talk about what all of this means in terms of what we've learned and some action steps.
Great. And I love the actions. So, I mean, we wanted to pull all of this together. And again, knowing that there's such a wide diversity of people who are listening in on this conversation. And the majority of you, you've not joined us on a Roundtable Talk before. And maybe for some of you, our work and who Food Recovery Network is, it's newer for you. So we wanted to pull all of this together, knowing that you are invited to any time to be in touch with us, and we can continue the conversation to support you in activating in the ways that you want. But what we learned, what we know, is without that cross-sector partnership, we cannot go as far. What is the saying? If you want to go fast, go solo, but if you want to go far, go together. We've learned that. We know this. And Atlanta is a beautiful testimonial to that. And again, Tina is a testimonial to that, not only as the board president, but also joining in and participating in a variety of different ways. And what we've seen with our maps, that the toll of routine community disinvestment harms all of us, every single one of us. Even if we as an individual, we are thriving, knowing that there are so many whole entire communities that are suffering, it harms all of us. And we need to reconfigure to bring that capital investment back into our communities so that we can all thrive. And then within that, the actions, how do we do this? For Food Recovery Network, we've been around for 12 years now. One carload of food at a time. We are supporting our communities. We are doing what we can. We are one conversation at a time, conversations like this. We don't expect miracles, but we do expect that there's going to be a lot of work. and we can all just take a small amount of that. And I often like to say, when we think about some of these numbers, it can feel overwhelming and it can make us feel really sad. But I know from being on actual recoveries and talking to so many people, many of whom they themselves are suffering from food insecurity, there's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of joking around, there's a lot of wellness of reciprocity, to be shared among all of us, even as we are facing something that is, very difficult. So any small action that we can take can really help us to correct this, even if it has been generational disinvestment and generational food insecurity. We can do this together. And so some of the ways that are helpful to Food Recovery Network are, if you help us to start some chapters in our priority states. You never know where an introduction is going to go. We've seen so many awesome introductions just reverberate across our network. So that's why we're always asking, it's a small gesture and it really means so much to us. So if you know anybody, it doesn't have to be, the dining provider, it doesn't have to be, anybody at a higher ed institution. Please make that introduction, and then we can take it from there in terms of trying to navigate to the right person. We're a really fun group of people, so usually we're not, people like to work with us. So please do feel free to make those introductions. And then, as Tina mentioned at the top of our conversation, and as Lauren, is on the call here today, who works at Fairlife, it is Hunger Action Month. And so your donations will be matched dollar for dollar by Fairlife. And thank you again so much, Fairlife, for being in our corner, knowing that material resources, financial resources really help us to be where we need to be. The pilots that Katie outlined for all of us, it took years to get to where we are. And that took financial support so that we could be in Atlanta, so that we could be in Irvine, so that we could make sure that our students and our alums can travel to where they need to be, these large scale events that we can mobilize. So thank you so much. And I really am just talking to the folks here listening that have that space in their budget. I know that many times, I've been at conferences or at places and I've just been like, oh geez, I don't have any money to spare. We understand that. This is only a request for those of you who feel like you have space in your budget to donate to FRN. And, a shout out to all of our donors that give $5 a month, $5 a year, $10 a month. It really does matter. And we have been vetted by multiple institutions, that we are really strong stewards of any resources that we get in financially. So please know that we are going to use any financial contributions from you wisely, and that it's going to directly help us to feed more people faster. And here we are, our new program year. We're so excited about what we are all going to be able to achieve together. And this is another huge shout out to the FRN national staff, to Kimmy, to Cassie, to Katie, of course, and to all the other staff members who aren't on this phone call or on this webinar. This is the work that we have ahead. We want to recover 1 million pounds of food. We are going to recover from 3 to 5 major events. We're going to be at the Super Bowl tailgate party again this year. That's one of the major events that we're going to recover from. We want to continue to deepen those relationships with all of the students listening in and our alums. And we're going to do that by continuing the momentum, 8 to 10 convenings. We're going to talk a lot about our maps this year. People are really interested in them. We love them. They're really important and critical to our work. So we're gonna have more very intentional conversations about our maps. We want to continue to grow. Higher education is such an important hub within any number of communities. We want to continue to grow. So we want to bring on 20 to 30 new chapters again this year, with that focus of half of them being in our priority areas. So no, we have priority areas based on how we can feed more people faster. Hunger is in every single zip code. So even if you have connections in higher ed that maybe isn't necessarily in a target state, please still make those introductions. And continuing our impact by bringing on more people into our network, and we want to be in other people's networks. We love working in partnership. So we want to bring on at least 20 new partnerships. And then within that, putting back into the communities where we work, alongside the community, $400,000 through efforts of recovery. So that's where we're headed for this year. And we're so excited that you can join us on this journey. And we really look forward to hearing your thoughts and ways that we can all contribute to this in any small way that we can.
Thank you so much, Regina. Appreciate it. I'll now take us into the Q&A portion. I know we stopped for some questions, so we just have one left from Charles so far on the docket, which I'll ask in just a second. But if anyone else has any questions, please add those to the chat or Q&A, and Kimmy will collect those for us. Charles, I know your question was, is there a seasonal element to your operations? A lot of more food recovered in summer, less in winters. Curious for folks' thoughts, either Regina or Katie. I'll prompt that for either of you.
Sure, I can take that with it depends. So where we have piloted our gleaning work, that has largely been in Atlanta and California, which obviously have warmer and more growing seasons than, for instance, Wisconsin or Massachusetts. So in the particular gleaning work, when we look to replicate that, yes, that will absolutely depend on the seasons, and there'll be differences. What I will say is a lot of our food that we recover, particularly through the student chapters, is already pre-prepared food from campus cafeterias and that sort of thing, which is available year round. So many of our students also recover at events. They also recover at local restaurants, which again have surplus food year round. So yes, for the gleaning, there will be some differences as we replicate, but it didn't really impact us with these pilots just because of where we worked.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it. I don't see any other questions coming in. Feel free to add if you have any last minute. But I do have a question for the group here. So Kimmy, if you can prompt our final poll. Just a general question for the folks on the call. How likely are you to refer FRN to a friend? Especially curious to get folks' answers for folks that are maybe new to FRN or new to Roundtable Talks. This will be interesting to see. So thank you for adding your response there. So with that, I will close this out here today with any final thoughts, comments. I will prompt just final thoughts from Tina, Regina, and Katie. Tina, let's start with you.
Yeah, just another big thank you to everyone. I'm very curious to see the results from the poll because, to me, it's really hard to argue with what Food Recovery Network does and what we're trying to accomplish here. And so spreading that message to friends, to family. My mom is on the call today. She's a community supporter and a donor. It's easy to do. It's such a message, as Regina said, of positivity and hope and making a difference. And I hope that you all will take that away based on all you've heard here today.
Thank you, Tina. Hi, Tina's mom. Thanks for joining. Usually my family joins as well. My grandparents, parents. I love all the friends, family. Katie, can you share any final thoughts for us here today?
Just want to say thank you for everybody for joining, and we look forward to being in touch further.
Thank you. And Regina, I will turn it to you to close us out here today.
Amazing. I specifically wanted to shout out Caroline over at ReFed. Thanks for joining. John, as we mentioned earlier, longtime friend of FRN. So thanks. I actually just mentioned Taproot yesterday. So if that's any testament to energy in the world. Kevin on the board, thanks for joining us. Lauren, of course, thank you. And Roxanne over at Sodexo, another longtime supporter of Food Recovery Networks. Thank you so much for being on. And I have to say hi to Shiwa, an FRN alum who was with me when I was doing that large scale recovery that I mentioned earlier. Thank you all so much for your time, and all those of you here that I didn't mention by name. We really can do this, together. And I know, I've been told that I have a lot of high expectations of people. And you know what? Okay, I do. but please know that anything that you can do to support FRN, making recommendations, helping us with the recovery, identifying a recovery that we can go on, there's a lot to be done. And until we all begin to incorporate this into our daily lives, things are just gonna remain the same. And we know that if things remain the same, we'll continue to have people suffering from food insecurity. So I just wanted to express my appreciation for all of you. I appreciate you listening to our many asks and the information that we have so that you all feel tooled in terms of how to have further conversations. This really is a community that we hope you feel part of. And so thanks for your time, everybody. I hope the rest of your day is wonderful. Take lots of deep breaths, have nice big drinks of water, whatever you might need. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate all of you.
Thank you all for joining. Appreciate your time and energy. Have a good rest of your day. Bye, all.
Bye, everybody.